The West African Frontier Force was a multi-battalion field force, formed by the British Colonial Office in 1900 to garrison the West African colonies of Nigeria, Gold Coast, Sierra Leone and Gambia. In 1928, it received royal patronage, becoming the Royal West African Frontier Force. Origins. The decision to raise this force was taken in 1897 because of British concern at French colonial expansion in territories bordering on northern Nigeria. The first troops were from that area and thought of by the British as Hauses to the end of colonial rule. The Hausa language was a lingua franca in a very multi-tribal force, especially in Nigeria. The task of raising the new locally recruited force was entrusted to Colonel F. D. Lugard, who arrived in Nigeria in 1898. The following year, an interdepartmental committee recommended the amalgamation of all existing British colonial military forces in West Africa under the designation of the West African Field Force. Rivalry between Britain and France for control of the trade on the River Niger led to the occupation of areas by the French, for instance at Leone, and the stationing of the frontier force at Yashikera and elsewhere in the region. On formation in 1900, the WAFF comprised Gold Coast Regiment 1 Battalion Infantry and 1 Battery Mountain Artillery, Northern Nigeria Regiment 3 Battalions Infantry, Southern Nigeria Regiment 2 Battalions Infantry and 2 Batteries Mountain Artillery, Sierra Leone Battalion 1 Battalion, the Gambia Company 1 Company. By 1908, the WAFF in northern Nigeria comprised 2 battalions of infantry, 2 batteries of artillery and 1 company of engineers. The infantry battalions at the time had an establishment of 1,200 men, the artillery batteries had 175 men and there were 46 engineers. There were 217 British officers, non-commissioned officers and specialists. Mounted infantry detachments were subsequently raised. The standard weapon was the 303 Martini Enfield carbine, and the force had 30 QF 2.95-inch mountain guns for the artillery. Uniforms. The parade uniform of the RWAFF throughout its history was a distinctive one. It comprised khaki drill shorts, red fezzes, scarlet zouave-style jackets edged in yellow, and red cummerbunds. Artillery units wore blue jackets with yellow braid and engineers red with blue braid. African warrant officers were distinguished by yellow braiding on the front of the jackets. The badge on the fez was a palm tree. For field dress, khaki shirt, shorts, jersey and puttees were worn with the round Kilmarnock cap. British officers wore khaki soldier drill uniforms with tropical helmets for review order and field dress. A green and black hackle was worn in the bush hats. For evening functions, a white mess uniform with rolled collar was worn with cummerbunds in blue for artillery and battalion colors for infantry officers. Because of its identification with colonial rule, this uniform was replaced shortly after Nigerian independence by a high-collared dark green tunic, peaked cap and light-colored trousers. In Ghana, a scarlet and blue British-style dress uniform was adopted. First World War. The West African Frontier Force first saw action during the occupation of the German Cameroon. The experience gained in this campaign during 1914–16, in difficult terrain against stubborn resistance, made the WAFF a valuable reinforcement to the British Empire forces operating against the German Schutztruppe in East Africa led by General Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck. A single battalion of the Gold Coast Regiment arrived in German East Africa in 1916, and was soon joined by 4 battalions of the Nigeria Regiment. All remained active in this theatre of war until 1918. By the end of the First World War, regimental strengths were as follows: the Queen's Own Nigeria Regiment 9 battalions, the Gold Coast Regiment 5 battalions, the Royal Sierra Leone Regiment 1 battalion, the Gambia Regiment 2 companies. The following battle honours were awarded separately to the constituent regiments of the WAFF during the First World War: Kamina, Douala, Garua, Banyo, Cameroons, 1914–1916, Dahobaho, Nyang-Ao, East Africa 1916–18. Second World War and after. In 1939, the RWAFF was transferred from Colonial Office to War Office control. Under the leadership of General George Gifford, the RWAFF served as a cadre for the formation of 81st Division and 82nd Division. Both divisions saw service during the Second World War, serving in Italian Somaliland, Abyssinia and Burma. In 1947, the RWAFF reverted to Colonial Office control. After the war, the RWAFF comprised the Nigeria Regiment, the Gold Coast Regiment, and the Sierra Leone Regiment. When Queen Elizabeth II visited Nigeria in 1956, she gave the Nigeria Regiment the title Queen's Own Nigeria Regiment. Despite the approach of independence, the military authorities were slow in commissioning African officers. For example, at the time of the Queen's visit, the 1st Battalion of the Nigeria Regiment had only 2 African officers, both lieutenants, Kerr Muhammad and Robert Adebayo. The American writer John Gunther, writing in 1953, did however report meeting 2 or 3 smart young Negro officers of the West African Frontier Force in Lagos. Gunther noted that all were former aides de camp and that he did not meet non-white ADCs in any of the other African colonies that he visited. Johnson Agui Inc was at the time the only African who had advanced to the rank of major. He became the first general officer commanding of the Army of Independent Nigeria. Commanders. From 1901 to 1938, the WAFF was administered by an Inspector General. From 1945, the force was administered by Colonel Commandant. Inspectors General Brigadier G.V. Kemble DSO 1901 to 1905. Brevet Colonel Thomas Smallin DSO 1905 to 1909. Major General Sir Percival Spearman Wilkinson KCM-GCB 1909 to 1913. Brevet Colonel Charles M. Dobell DSO 1913–1914. Vacant 1914 to 1920. Colonel A. H. W. Hayward, CMGCBE DSO 1920 to 1924. Colonel R. D. F. Oldman, CMG DSO. Colonel S. S. Butler, CMG, DSO 1926 to 1930. Vacant 1930 to 1932. Brigadier C. C. Norman, CMG, CBE, DSO 1932 to 1936. General Sir George Gifford GCB, DSO 1936 to 1938. Vacant 1938 to 1945. Colonels Commandant General Sir George James Gifford, GCB, DSO 1945 to 1954. Brigadier Charles Roger Allen Swinnerton, CB, DSO 1954 to 1958. General Sir Lashmar Gordon Whistler, GCB, KBE, DSO 1958 to 1960. Colonels-in-Chief. The RWAFF received royal patronage through its Colonels-in-Chief, 1928 FMHM King George V, 1936 FMHM King Edward VIII, 1936 FMHM King George VI, 1953 HM Queen Elizabeth II. RWAFF disbanded at independence. In 1957, the British colony of the Gold Coast obtained independence as Ghana, and the Gold Coast Regiment was withdrawn from the RWAFF to form the Ghana Regiment of Infantry in the newly independent nation. The RWAFF was finally disbanded in 1960 as the British colonies of Nigeria, Sierra Leone and the Gambia moved towards independence. The former RWAFF units formed the basis of the new national armies of the respective states.